Welcome back. If this is your first time here, then welcome. This is the third entry in a series where I take a look at box sets of old horror and science fiction films, to see if I can find any good ones. I didn't have much luck with the science fiction box set, but maybe this one is a little more curated. What I've got here is a collection of... Yeah, you gotta hold this thing from the bottom. Anyways, what I've got here is an oddly specific collection of mad scientist movies. While the set boasts it has 50 movies, 20 of these films have been ones I've already covered in my horror and science fiction box set videos, which conveniently leaves us with only 30 movies to look at. While the oddly specific theming means we're going to be seeing a lot of repeat character archetypes, namely the mad scientist, it also means that it's justified to have both horror and science fiction movies in this collection, because there's a little bit of crossover with both. As for trigger warnings, well, these are older movies. Older horror movies, even. You should know what you're getting into. I will say some of the movies here are more of the exploitation variety, so expect weirder subject matters and more gore. I want to give a quick disclaimer. If the footage from a movie I review looks good, that's because I ripped it from another source. The collective visual quality of the films in this collection is, without a doubt, some of the worst I've ever seen. Sure, the transfers didn't look good in the prior sets I looked at, but something must have happened over at Mill Creek because the digital tearing on some of these already faded prints makes them look even worse. Anyways, I will be looking at 10 movies per video. There will be 3 parts. And I picked and placed the movie order in a way where I saved the best for last. Let's start with a heavy hitter. Directed by Robert Wein, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is a silent German film released in 1920, and it stands as one of the horror genre's most influential entries. While horror movies existed before this one, and macabre, spooky elements have been used in films in the past, it's safe to say this is the first surviving horror film to attempt an atmosphere while codifying elements that would later become tropes. Caligari is very much the great-great-grandfather of all modern horror. Presented by an unreliable narrator, the film is about a carnival performer named Caligari, whose main attraction, a sleepwalking man named Cesar, is used by the Doctor to murder people. Caligari's motivations are manic and unpredictable. The first victim of Cesar is a town clerk who is rude to the Doctor, and the second is a man Cesar predicts will die at dawn. It's some sick way he's concerned about keeping up appearances. The somnambulist, a pale-looking guy in simple all-black apparel, is the progenitor of so much horror iconography. This guy has a body count and makes occasional use of a knife, making him one of cinema's first slasher villains. He walks in a slow, trance-like state, evoking the imagery of a zombie. He falls in love with a woman and carries her off while she's unconscious, a direct inspiration for numerous monster movies to follow shortly after. Under all that makeup too, he's also one of cinema's first goth guys, before that was even a thing. The imagery of this film is a product of the German Expressionist art movement, which this film is often pointed to as a major example of. The environments of Caligari make heavy use of painted shadow, warped, angular architecture, and the characters have accentuating makeup that emphasizes their features. To match, the performances of this film are hyper-exaggerated, to a degree that works in a silent film, and also indicates that they're not completely there mentally. It adds to the surreal yet manic vibe the film is going for, and that's what I mean by it attempting an atmosphere. It's not always clear what characters are doing, but they're sure as heck acting the hell out of it. Even the film's structure is atypical, as it's separated into 6 acts as opposed to a standard 3. And the film's title and dialogue cards are eccentric and match the warped environments. The surreal reality is never commented on by the characters, it's just the world they live in. And for reasons that are justified by the film's ending, which I won't spoil even though this movie is over 100 years old. Jesus Christ, everyone in this movie is dead. You've probably figured it out by now because it's such a cliche, but I can buy its use as a twist for a movie that came out before it was even a cliche yet. Hell, this could have been the origin of it. It's also one of those movies where the twist recontextualizes everything that came before it, so it benefits from a second watch. If you're gonna watch this one, and I actually recommend you do, it should be through the numerous high-quality restorations that have been done of the film. The transfer of Caligari, found on the Mad Scientist collection, is a smeary mess with washed-out and blurry visuals. I can't even read half of the English inserts. It's highly interpretational, slow in a good way, and, most importantly, eerie. It's not only a highly influential film, but also a pretty darn good one for its time. Here's something a little sillier. Released during the golden age of science fiction, The Head is a 1959 German film, dubbed in English on the set, of course.
We shall have to go ahead without him.
The plot goes as such. With the help of a Serum Z, Dr. Abel, a brilliant scientist, has his head preserved against his will by a newly hired mad scientist, Dr. Ood.
That left me only one last chance. And that was to perform the dog operation on your head.
This is only the initial setup, however, as Dr. Ood is more dead set on giving Abel's hunchbacked assistant a new body. 117 days later, apparently, the operation is a success, but the assistant immediately realizes something is wrong. She wasn't told that her head was being put on a completely different body. Man, there were a lot of transplant movies around this time, with the premise and the scenes of cabaret dancers dancing in front of suits of armor? Okay, whatever, gets your rocks off. Anyways, with this premise and the scenes of the mad scientist going around looking for sexy ladies to kidnap for the operation, the film reminds me a lot of The Brain That Wouldn't Die, though this is a marginally better movie. In the past, I've complained about the persistent white noise in early sound films adding to the boredom, but here I think the moments of silence actually add to the atmosphere. Somewhat. The scene where the hunchback lady, Irene, awakens from her operation is also a little spooky. Despite these admirable attempts at atmosphere, there are points where the more questionable elements hamper the experience. There's this device that Dr. Abel made that hands out surgical tools on command, and it's clearly people behind a wall pushing the tools out. It's pretty funny. Also, I mean, the imagery of a head on a table isn't terribly convincing, but it's just a concept I personally find too silly to be frightening.
No, I don't want to be seen like this.
The dialogue is also quite clunky at points, though I wonder if this is more of a problem with the dub than anything. It's incredibly on-the-nose stuff.
I want to do a head of you, may I?
The plot is barely about the titular head, too. For a long time, the movie is more about Dr. Ood's crazy head-swapping experiment with Irene, so the screenplay here is rather confused about what it wants to focus on. I thought this movie was about a head on a table. This guy is also weirdly accepting of Irene having his old girlfriend's body. Like, yeah, he didn't really like his old girlfriend that much, but he comes off as creepier than the mad scientist.
Now you have a normal body. You can fall in love. You'll be like everyone else.
Implying people with deformities can't experience love. There's also some gross Stockholm syndrome with Dr. Ood, and yeah, this is suitably uncomfortable. I mean, this is a horror movie after all, but it's not in the fun way, you know? It's not like a fun little horror movie thing. It's just kind of weird and creepy. That said, this movie is a little better than I expected. There are times where its slow pacing actually works, delivering some mildly spooky scenes. But everything involving the head is half-baked, and the head-swapping stuff the movie is more interested in focusing on isn't that interesting. This is very much a movie that named itself after what amounts to a subplot. Occasionally eerie, but mostly just silly. Check it out for some cheap thrills.
Shut up! Mad, yes, you're mad.
I am not mad! No, I am not mad!
Yeah, I want to get one of these movies out of the way in the first part. You know the ones. Produced by a Poverty Row studio, released in the 30s. I've covered many of these before. They dominate these box sets because the copyright on them has lapsed. I won't knock the hustle of making a movie, but ones like these are more than a chore to sit through. That said, I don't think I've ever exclaimed, "What?" or "Who's this character?" or "What the hell is happening?" this much in a 48-minute experience since Beast of Yucca Flats. This is a demonstrably better movie than that one, but I think it might just be more confusing. According to IMDb, the plot reads, a mad scientist performs experiments on the criminal mind on captured criminals on board his private ship. I mean, I can see that. Characters here are just suddenly introduced. Like, seriously, our introduction to these two women involved in a poison ring is this hard cut to one of them holding a gun on the other. There's a serial killer that's dropped into the plot with no build-up. We don't know what the Doctor is doing for a very long time. And to top it all off, this movie just starts. After the credits, it hard cuts to this gang of mobsters planning on taking over the ship. It's like we jumped into the second act and completely skipped the first. IMDb and other sources list this movie as being 57 minutes, which it isn't. Or is it? I did some minor sleuthing, and as it turns out, the version of the film that can be found on streaming services and this box set is missing a good chunk of footage. The footage from an uncut version of the film actually explains several questions I have. The reason why it felt like the first act of the film was missing was because the first act of the film was actually missing. The truncated version cut out the first 16 minutes. All of it is important setup for the rest of the film. In this version, we get the explanation in the first scene that the scientist is in the midst of a trial for his experiments, which seek to, quote, cure criminality, unquote, by manipulating the endocrine gland.
Doctor, is it true that through your experiments in the endocrine glands you can cure crime?
Yeah, what about this crime cure?
He's escaping on the titular torture ship to continue his experiments and avoid his court date. He's still making criminals even more insane, so, doing a bang-up job there. Kind of a dumb character. The serial killer that's inexplicably revealed to be on the ship is properly set up with this newspaper headline here. In fact, all of the characters are properly introduced that way. These characters all converge on the ship because the Doctor is going to experiment on them. Many kudos to this YouTuber for posting the uncut version online. It helped answer the numerous questions I had, and it also gave me more to talk about, because unfortunately, I don't have much to say about the film itself. It's an average dime-a-dozen cheapo thriller like many of the others at this time. For what it's worth, the cast here is decent. They're delivering this absurd material the best they can.
I'd be tickled to death to give you a shave.
Well, thank you, Harry.
And some of these lines actually landed for me.
You know how to swim, Ritter?
Yeah, a little. Why?
Well, you're due for a good long one if you don't get out of here quick.
Okay, baby.
I feel like the fact that it was directed by the guy who did White Zombie, Victor Halperin, helps. There are still a number of contrivances. This gang of hardened criminals is taken down by two guys. The mad scientist is a fucking goofy character. He claims to be curing people of their criminality, but just keeps making them worse. It does eventually end up working, and that resolution is pretty silly.
It's funny, but I want to give myself up now.
For a thriller, the film isn't very thrilling. It never really clicks. I was mostly bored throughout, sans the initial intrigue of learning there was a longer cut.
As you know, I've obtained in this synthetically the active ingredients of the endocrine glands governing criminality.
Yeah, it's not as awful as the truncated edit would have you believe, but it's not very good either. I'm glad that I saw it uncut to give it a fairer shake. The movie ends with a foreign man planning to swim back to his home country.
You think you can make it?
Hilarious. Next movie. Lady Frankenstein is a slightly truncated, definitely pan and scanned English dub of an Italian production, at least on this DVD set. It's very much chasing the same trend of sex and violence as the Hammer Frankenstein movies, but it's nowhere near as good. The daughter of Frankenstein, Tanya, has just arrived home from university after becoming a licensed surgeon. Turns out she has the same radical ideas as her dad, and she wants to help him create another monster. After her dad is killed by the monster, Tanya vows to create her own monster to kill the other one.
How can somebody so lovely be such a bitch?
It honestly goes off the fucking rails. She's attracted to the brain of this guy, Marshall, but she's also attracted to the body of this mentally disabled guy, Thomas. So she swaps their bodies and it makes Marshall, in Thomas's body, absurdly strong for some reason. I'm fairly certain that's not how the human body works, but whatever, silly science fiction and whatnot. But still, how is this supposed to clear her father's name? If anything, she had to kill a man to make this brain transplant work. What she does is debatably more detestable than her father. This is all happening as the monster is running around the countryside killing people, so it's very much a weird divergence in the plot. The guy playing Frankenstein is Joseph Cotten, a quite prolific actor who appeared in movies like Citizen Kane. Unfortunately, he doesn't bring his A-game here, at least not in this dubbed version of himself.
Such a grotesque dream.
He's extremely wooden in this role. Just compare the performance of Colin Clive with his when the monster is revived. It's like night and day.
Oh, it's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
He's alive.
Sure, he's killed in the first 35 minutes, but you're stuck with that performance until then. The Frankenstein monster also looks not great. You'd think Frankenstein would have cleaned this guy up before putting a brain in him. Also to make sure they weren't using the brain of a murderer, I don't know. There's a reason why Frankenstein told Fritz to get a normal brain in the Universal movie. This whole experiment was doomed to fail. This version seems to have been cut down. Several minutes are missing from the longer version. And cuts like these don't hide the removed content very well.
Nice, cheerful place you have here, Lynch.
The weird soundscape that usually accompanies Italian productions due to them not recording on-set audio does aid in the atmosphere of this production. It's all very surreal and alien. It kinda works. It is delightfully cliché, too. Plenty of miscellaneous shots of lab equipment, beakers boiling, the monster is assembled through classic methods, bats surround it for some reason during the resurrection scene. It's classic stuff, and the sets look decent. It tries to sex up the material to pretty unsexy results, though. This definitely isn't a good movie, but I did find it enjoyable at times. The sound design is delightfully pulpy. The plot gets derailed into this schlocky brain-swapping story that's at the very least intriguing. And some of the scenes with the shitty monster walking around killing people are funny. It does have a strange, watchable vibe to it. I can see how this could be a cult classic. Despite starring a semi-prolific cast of television actors like Robert Vaughn, The Lucifer Complex is a film so obscure it doesn't even have a Wikipedia page. Apparently filmed in 1976 and remaining unreleased until 1978 when it was shown on television, I frankly think it should have stayed shelved. I did not enjoy this one at all.
What about the Lucifer problem?
The plot goes like this. A secret agent named Manning uncovers a conspiracy to bring back leaders of the demonetization police through cloning, and that includes everyone's least favorite mustached man. Mario, of course.
Too bad the old boy isn't around to see it.
Now the film starts in the worst way possible. We're first introduced to this guy living on an island, and our first impression is that he mumbles a lot.
Came by to watch me work, huh?
20 minutes go by, and so much of it is spent making grumbly, doomer observations about the evolution of humanity and technology. Minutes upon minutes upon minutes of these ramblings go by, and it's all just spent looking at stock footage. It's one of the worst openings to a movie I've ever seen, and it only gets marginally better from here. In fact, in an act of cruelty, this guy is the framing device. We watch the entire movie from his perspective because he somehow has footage of everything that happened. The framing device adds nothing. The actual plot of the film is some mildly amusing schlock. I wouldn't call it good, but it is reasonably watchable. Slow at times, not good enough to justify its length, but not as bad as the framing device would have you believe. The plot is a somewhat entertaining blend of science fiction and espionage. Now, something a lot of Bond ripoffs and even a couple Bond films struggle with is casting the right actor. You want someone who can be suave and charming. If you don't cast the right person or write the wrong kind of dialogue, then you get a lot of...
You're going to teach me belly dancing?
Muscles.
creepy vibes. There's some dumb overacting here.
You dirty rotten!
German soldier. But yeah, it's still not a good movie. The framing device really drags this one down. Because it starts in a post-apocalypse, the plot leading up to that outcome should be interesting. You know, to keep the suspense going. But it's just not fun. It's too hokey. The flick is a bore.
He is a fine-looking specimen, isn't he?
It doesn't help that the transfer of this film looks and sounds like garbage, more so than the others I've looked at so far. The audio is muffled and sometimes the high-pitched humming can be heard. The telecine is not only low quality, but digital tearing can be seen throughout. I've seen movie bootlegs that are on par with or better than how this movie looks. The Lucifer Complex is a slog. It has some funny bits, but I don't recommend it.
We are the master race.
Getting another one of these out of the way in the first video. It's another Poverty Row feature from the 30s, this time with Bela Lugosi once again being in a role he is overqualified for. This one, Shadow of Chinatown, is an edited down version of a 4-hour-long serial. Now, the last time I talked about a movie that was cut down this tremendously, I pointed out how truncated it felt. This also feels like it's cutting down on 4-hour-long material. What, you thought I was going to say that it didn't? This one is a little more fun at least. Out of fear of Asian businesses overtaking domestic production, an evil lady in a china dress instructs the scientist, played by Bela Lugosi, to do what he can to disrupt businesses in Chinatown. This includes getting a bunch of people to pretend to be Chinese. It was a different time. They do cast a handful of Asian actors in the film, but one of them is a stereotyped house servant.
If Chinese merchants suspend business, logical thought indicates much profit accrued to evil rivals.
It was a different time. The acting in this one, from this lady in particular, is very cartoony.
I must get a sensational story and get it quick.
And often stilted.
When can you begin on this?
Bela Lugosi can be entertaining here too. He's doing what I think are supposed to be the same intimidating stares that made his Dracula performance so noteworthy. It's much hokier here though.
You are going to sleep, Krogan.
While the editing here leaves a bit to be desired, there are some mildly amusing action scenes here. Some pretty solid stunts. Like this scene where this guy swings through a window on a telephone wire, or the actress for the reporter lady tries to bring down a scaffold. The latter one would have been done by a stunt double these days, maybe cut to a close-up of the actress but have a stunt double in the wide, but nope, that's the actress doing that stunt. But yeah, I didn't really care for this one. It was a very passive watch. It's old, there's some creepy undercurrent of racism. I'd like to move on. Now, despite sharing the name with George Romero's Living Dead series, House of the Living Dead bears no relation. In fact, it's a 1976 South African film that has nothing to do with zombies. The name is a total tease. If anything, it's about the completely dead, as in ghosts, spirits. The movie starts out with a bit of promise, a bit of intrigue. Before a title sequence set inside a nice little lab set, there's a scene where a hooded figure stuffs a raging ape into a sack. A man passes by in a horse. Another watches from a nearby house. How do all these disparate elements relate to each other? The movie beckons you to find out. I like that. Unfortunately, the first 90 seconds are as good as it gets. This murky, mumbly little movie is a period piece, taking place on a South African plantation, and it follows... well, it follows a couple things. There's a deranged mad scientist named Breck experimenting on isolating and removing the soul from the body, his hypothesis being that the soul is an organic entity, whatever that means. There are also themes of witchcraft and voodoo sprinkled throughout. There's also something in there about the owners of the plantation not being allowed to marry out of fear of continuing their legacy, as Michael, one of the plantation owners, brings over his fiancée and complicates things with his mother. It's all a bit rambling with all the domestic drama thrown into the mix. At times it doesn't even feel like horror or even science fiction. It's more akin to a dry murder mystery with some spooky stuff tacked on. It only ever goes full horror in the last 14 minutes, and the stuff leading up to it isn't all that compelling.
Did you lock my door last night, Lena?
No.
Thank God there's a higher quality version of this movie on YouTube, or else I'd be completely lost here. The transfer on the Mill Creek set is, once again, rancid. I can barely see what's happening during the night scenes. The drama with the fiancé is utterly uninteresting. I don't really buy these characters due to their somewhat stilted delivery, and the script could have used a couple rewrites. I'm also just not a fan of this particular setting. It's not awful, it has some mildly creepy moments. Hell, even the ending has a couple cool things going for it. Though the final moments amount to a guy stumbling around to being scared of invisible things making noises at him. It's definitely not an underrated classic. I didn't like it. Next movie. Another Poverty Row film. The Devil Bat is a movie starring Bela Lugosi. I actually touched upon this one a little in a previous video that highlighted the film's monster, but I'll go into the actual film a little more here. The movie concerns a mad scientist, shocking, I know, who is offered a pittance despite his chemistry making the company he works for millions of dollars. In an act of revenge, he develops an electronic device that enlarges bats, and he sends them to attack his enemies. Honestly, he was totally justified in doing this. His employers were assholes.
You're a dreamer, Doc. Too much money is bad for dreamers.
Keep in mind he's a physician and chemist, so leaping from that profession to making giant bats is almost like a completely separate career path. He does use his background as a chemist to give his enemies makeup that the bat uses to target them. It doesn't stop there. This is the noise the bat makes when it kills people. Fucking comedy.
What is that squeaky sound? Oh, just some night noise.
The cast in this one is full of goofballs.
Say, have you ever had a date with a girl?
A girl? Oh, yes, a girl. I believe I did take a girl out once.
There's the overzealous cameraman named One Shot McGuire. Everyone aside from Lugosi talks in that sort of sing-songy transatlantic 40s speak. Everyone is wearing a business suit, and Lugosi seems to just be having a good time with this. There's just something likably antiquated about the whole thing. I can't be mad at this.
How did you develop a monster bat like that?
You wouldn't understand scientific theory.
Even when the film is clearly wasting the viewer's time, there's a scene early on when Lugosi is experimenting on the devil bat and he stops in the middle of it to adjust a knob, then starts it up again. It's a pointless little moment, but it's there to pad out the runtime. The close-ups of the devil bats, yes, bats plural, one of them dies, is that of a fruit bat. But promotional material and even the title card suggest a vampire bat was the intended design of the creature. That's just so funny. They wanted something fearsome and ugly, but ended up using the wrong footage and got something cute. Compared to other Poverty Row features, this one is actually a little better than what I'm used to. Despite some of the aforementioned pacing issues, it's very watchable. It's not a bad way to spend an hour. -2.
Imbecile. Bombastic ignoramus.
Bombastic ignoramus. That's a new one. Another movie from the 30s. This one is under 50 minutes. Okay, not actually. It's another film that was unfortunately truncated at some point.
Father.
With all the awkward sounds cutting out, it suggests that someone kept bumping into the telecine.
Hello.
But here's what the movie is about. The mad scientist of this film is a Russian named Dr. Boris Karlov, no relation. and he's taking revenge against the nobles for the suicide of his daughter. While I wouldn't call this one an underrated classic, this movie has a couple things going for it. The use of shadows for the horror scenes is quite effective. The set design here has some eccentric choices. The door to Karloff's room has his name engraved on it, like he's an 8-year-old, and this lady's room has a copy of the Mona Lisa in it, which is not impossible, but also just kind of weird, I don't know. But generally, the sets here work.
I let your man lead me to you so that I could do this.
I love the acting here. Everyone has that transatlantic 30s speak. It's hokey, but very endearing too. It's like they think they're in a stage production, and they have to, like, speak to the crowd. In fact, I'd say waiting for the next weird line read was what kept me going.
Oh, now look here, my boy. You've got to realize we're dealing with a madman.
But yeah, this one wasn't that bad. It's a little slow and repetitive with all the scenes of people in rooms talking, but there was enough happening to keep me engaged. All the film's eccentricities make it a funny little time capsule. Not an underrated classic by any means, but it's watchable. Maybe don't watch it on this DVD set, though. The misleadingly titled The Revenge of Dr. X is an American/Japanese co-production released in 1970. The film's original title was Venus Flytrap, and a probable explanation as to why this print looks like dog shit is because it was apparently found in a warehouse. This same source also explains that the ill-fitting title was actually meant for another film, but the credits to that film were incorrectly spliced into the opening of this film. Utterly bizarre situation here.
And get those things out of my sight!
Professor Bragan is a rocket scientist/botanist, and after an explosion of temper that results in him passing out, he's recommended a trip to Japan to cool off. Before he leaves, he takes with him a Venus flytrap, which are apparently a thing in North Carolina. I didn't know that. A whole 50 minutes go by as he fucks around with his assistant and collects various plant parts, and this eventually culminates in the creation of a humanoid monster made of plants. Why did he do this?
They might destroy my proof of the real basis of human evolution.
Complete bullshit. So, this one has one of the strangest crossovers of talent I've seen yet. The film's screenplay was written by an uncredited Ed Wood Jr. As in, focus of a Tim Burton movie, Ed Wood Jr. And the film was distributed and partially contributed to by Toei. So if you thought the monster in this looks like something out of Kamen Rider, that's because it probably is. I mean, Kamen Rider wouldn't start airing until a year after this film was released. It's definitely got the same design principles as the monsters in the show, a humanoid shape with a theme to it. That theme being plants. Weird connection aside, I had to watch this one in a group.
Legitimate question, what genre is this? The genre it feels is just people walking around.
That's what a lot of this shit is, let me tell you. It's so fucking dry and unexciting, it needed the company. What if there were plants and they were people?
Wow, that's crazy.
Now that you have seen what you have seen, can you deny the fact that there may be truth that you do not know?
Shots are constantly framed awkwardly, which may be because this is a pan and scan of a film shot in widescreen. But there's enough incompetence in the film's other elements that suggests this was also an accident. The characters here are utterly uninteresting, and that's ignoring the fact that it was this Japanese actress's first acting gig.
You did your best.
Apparently my best hasn't been good enough.
We spend so much time with them, and they don't say or do anything interesting or charismatic. And I swear, Bragan's actor is drunk in every take.
I was to study the relationship between the giant sequoia in California and
the giant sequoia, okay.
He's so
French.
Oh boy, it's hitting him hard.
He took one sip.
Yeah, on that take.
Fucking lightweight. He probably soft out of his gourd.
The French champagne.
There's this ridiculous sequence almost halfway through the film where Bragan rides a car down a mountain, gets in another car to get to another location, then rides a taxi to a museum. The entire process is so comedically obtuse, and I suspect this was one of the plot beats left in from Ed Wood's draft, because it's a level of absurdity consistent with his work.
Okay. Oh, thank oh my god, I thought he was gonna...
Oh my god.
Getting another. Another one, what?
Is this like scene
is he
of getting
being
into
tailed
a
by the
car,
cops?
driving to another car, driving to another car?
There definitely isn't enough of the monster here. Sure, you want to build up to something like this or show it sparingly, but again, the characters don't justify that choice. I don't care about what these planks of wood have to say. There's this creepy little guy living in the house Bragan and his lady friend are staying at, and you'd think he's gonna do something. He has a musical leitmotif of toccata and fugue in D minor.
Then why can't it be human?
But he doesn't do anything, and he's killed by the monster in an unceremonious way. There's a scene with naked ladies on the beach, and it's like, wow, okay, I guess we're doing gratuitous nudity now? But it's also the only surprising moment in the film. The music is migraine-inducing, the script is ridiculous, the pacing with all the horrible driving scenes is glacial, the acting is generally lethargic, and the monster is unimpressive. I definitely wouldn't recommend this one. If you've got 94 minutes to spare and a friend group willing to indulge in it, it can be a blast. It sure was for me.
Hey, watch this in VR if you want to give yourself a concussion.
Oh, no.
We aren't halfway through.
Oh, how far are we in?
We are 38 minutes.
Oh, we've just now reached the half-hour point.
But I absolutely would not recommend a solo viewing.
What? Oh, what?
Yes.
Oh my God. Wait, what happened?
The
goat
shot.
lived.
It's an actually cool shot.
Okay, the goat lived.
And that's that. Tune in for part 2 where I take a look at more of these. With a few exceptions, we're doing okay so far. Nothing here has been as objectively awful as some of the worst movies on the science fiction box set. In fact, a couple of these have been alright. We'll see if the rest of the box set can keep the ball rolling. Hey, thanks for making it to the end of the video. If you are watching this and the video is currently public, then that means parts 2 and 3 are available on my Patreon to the highest tiers. On that note, here are the top patrons who I would like to thank for making videos like this possible. Hey, I'm Mooney, Krazak53, Kamen, Queer Kaiju, Radiant GV, Chronicler Waba, Alcoholic Alligators, Ryan Santa Cruz, Avak Robot, The Antagonist, Richard Ciavardon, Ziggy Zigra, It's God Z, Big Odilo, An Actual Dimetrodon, CMG, Red Comet Harry, and Marpzilla. Thank you very much.